I am recording this very special Parsha Podcast from a different location. I am not in the Torch Center. I'm not even in the city of Houston or the state of Texas. I'm in upstate New York, in Rockland County, in Muncie, New York. I'm in my parents' house. I'm in the basement again. I haven't recorded here in some time. And not only are we in a different location, this is a very unorthodox hour. It's right now 12:20 a.m., so it's early Tuesday morning. And this is like the only little window this week that I have to record. So here I am. I hope you are well wherever you are. And I'm here in this new location at this very strange hour. And the reason why I'm here is because this is a week of weddings. It's a whole week of weddings. We had a wedding last night, so I guess Sunday night. We had a wedding tonight. And we have a wedding in Toronto on Wednesday night. And then there's a big bash, Sheva Brachos on Thursday, and a whole Shabbos of celebration. So you see, on Sunday night, my niece Meira Wolbe, she got married in New York. And then tonight, the rabbi of our shul in Houston, his daughter got married also in New York. Tomorrow we're flying to Toronto. This is the whole family, mind you. We're flying to Toronto, and we have my sister-in-law, Tova. Her wedding is on Wednesday night, and then we'll be there till we fly back to Houston on Sunday. So this is a packed week. It's a packed week. And I had two options, as I always do. Either we say, okay, it's time to hang up our skates and call it quits and say, we'll take a week off, or maybe you got a replacement. Or I could come here at 12:20 a.m., go to the basement, pull out the paraphernalia, and begin to record. And that, of course, is the decision that we made. I hope it's a good decision. I hope it's the right decision, because this has been a week of some poor decisions. We made a poor decision, a few poor decisions. First of all, we had a wedding on Sunday night that we can't miss. It's Meira's wedding, Meira Wolbe's wedding. We can't miss that wedding. So we had to fly to New York, though, to participate in the wedding. So we said, we'll just go on Sunday morning. What could go wrong, right? What could possibly go wrong? Oh, and we'll fly Spirit. We'll fly Spirit. And they're known to get you on time. We were paying for 9 tickets, don't judge me. So those were some of the poor decisions. But I'll tell you, there were thunderstorms Sunday morning. And the appointed hour for departure comes and goes. There isn't even a plane there. And they announce on the speaker at the airport, we have a ground stop or ground halt. I've got the correct term for it. But basically everything stops because there is thunderstorms. Finally the plane comes, and finally we get on the plane, and the pilot tells us, well, we don't have any fuel, and we can't even go because there's a ground stop, and I'll update you every 15 minutes. You know what that means? That means you're not making the wedding, right? But thank God, my wife told me that she was saying Psalms. She was praying the whole time that we make it, because all the other flights that were scheduled to leave from Houston to New York, that are all the participants of the wedding, they were all delayed, the flights were canceled, and our flight, not the United flight, not the Southwest flight, the lowly Spirit flight, it made it on time. And we rented the car. We had a 15-passenger van. It was all there, perfect. Our badge came the first, and we made it on time with some time to spare to the wedding number 1, wedding number 2 tonight. Tomorrow we fly to YYZ to Toronto, wedding on Wednesday. It's a full week, but now it's midnight. It's past midnight, and we have to talk about the Parsha, Parshas Kedoshim, and I have to give you a little bit of a background to the ideas that I want to share today. I had a bit of a change in perspective that relates to a verse in our Parsha, perhaps the most famous verse of any Parsha, the verse of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You have to love your fellow as yourself. I had a change in perspective, and it got me to re-examine and restudy this verse and this mitzvah, and I thought I would share that with you because I found it to be very helpful and useful for me, and perhaps it will serve as such for you as well. So of course, our Parsha, there are tons of mitzvahs in rapid succession, but there's one mitzvah that our sages point to as being in a class of its own. Of course, we don't assign hierarchy to mitzvahs. All verses are equal. They're all from the Almighty. How can we say one's more important than another? It's not a Jewish thing. It's not a Torah value to say, this is my favorite verse. This is my favorite mitzvah. That said, our sages, they point to this verse, to this mitzvah in particular, and say this is special because this is emblematic of what the Almighty wants of us. And of course, every mitzvah is worthy of constant study and re-examination. And certainly this one, the one that our sages point to, is saying this is very important. This is something which is representative, which personifies what the goal of Torah is in general. And of course, this year we want to go deep and deeper. So it's worthwhile to go deep and deeper to try to unlock some of these secrets of this mitzvah. And it's especially so because I had an incident regarding this mitzvah just recently. The incident relates to some of the news of late with, of course, the war in Gaza and all the anti-Israel rhetoric that has emerged, and of course these protests on college campuses. And of course, this is not new. We are veterans. We're not naive. We know how these things work. We know that we're not going to get public support across the board, and we're very happy with whatever support we do get. And it's kind of sad and, of course, shameful that our enemies have been championing the horrific slaughter of October 7th since it happened, and the rallying for Palestine. Suddenly they care so much, of course, about the humanitarian and such, and they accuse Israel of all sorts of crimes that are totally fabricated and certainly not grounded in reality. But things really went up a notch in recent weeks, as you know, on college campuses across the country. And of course, there are a lot of different perspectives that we can analyze. But one thing that really got to me, that really rankled me, is this whole idea of Jews, our brothers and sisters, rallying in support of our enemies. It's, of course, tragic. Tragic to see, Jews turning on each other. I think it's also indicative, perhaps, of a failure of our people to educate our youth properly. You support your family, you support your people, and it's deeply enraging. And when I was thinking about it, how to react, how to respond to this phenomenon, initially I thought, and perhaps many of y'all would agree with this, is that we have Jews who are traitors, who are turncoats. You want to be someone who betrays your people? We're done with you. We're going to disown you. You're disenfranchised. Okay, you don't want to support your brothers and sisters in wartime? Fine. Let's ostracize you, make you an outcast. You are a pariah. We don't want you as part of our people. That was my instinct in the face of this phenomenon. But then thinking more about it, I came to this bombshell realization that even those people, those horrible traitors, those people who are standing up for our enemies, even those people, I think, you could argue, send me an email, rabbi@wolbachim.com if you want to argue. I think they are included in this verse in our parsha, love your fellow as yourself. We still have to love them. And the proof that they are still included in this, the Talmud tells us. The Talmud, it's a very interesting subject. The Talmud's trying to figure out, how do we execute those who are guilty of a capital crime and must be stoned to death? So we're not dealing with good people, right? These are criminals. These are people who committed horrific acts in front of witnesses, and they were warned not to do it, and they did some flagrant crime. These are the worst amongst us. And the Talmud's trying to figure out, well, how do we stone them to death? And the Talmud talks about, well, first we have to shove them off a building. But how tall should the building be? If it's too short, well, they're not going to die fast. And if it's too tall, well, then they'll die in this horrific manner where all their limbs will be dismembered. So Talmud says, we can't do either one of those. Why? Because we have to love your fellow as yourself. And even though this person's a criminal, and they committed a horrific crime, and they're worthy of capital punishment in the eyes of the Torah, and we're going to do it. Nevertheless, let's try to find a better, more humane, more pleasant, if you will, method of execution for such a criminal, for such an evil, wicked person. Why? Because you have to love your fellow as yourself. And they're still included in that. So my realization, the bombshell, is that if someone who is guilty of a capital crime in front of witnesses, and they were warned, and they flagrantly did it, and now we have to execute them in fulfillment of the laws of the Torah, and they're still included in this verse as evidence by the Talmud saying, well, that's how we know how to kill them properly. We have to find a way that conforms with this mitzvah, with this verse. Well, certainly the Jews, our brothers and sisters, the traitors, those who are supporting our enemies, I think we still have to love them. Now, of course, to be fair, there may be grounds for someone to be disincluded from the requirement to love them. But I think that certainly most of the Jews who are rallying in support of our enemies, most of them would be qualified halachically as captive children. There's this idea in the Talmud that if you have a Jewish child who's taken captive and they're a baby and they're raised in a way that's completely disconnected from their people, and they're behaving in a way that's totally not in line with how Jews ought to behave, well, how could you blame them? They're a captive child. And that idea applies to people that weren't raised with a strong Jewish identity. You imagine this principle would extend to them. They didn't grow up with a strong connection to them being Jewish, to the Jewish family and the Jewish principles, the Jewish heritage. They're probably included in the halachic classification of captive children, and I think we still need to love them. So I thought it would be worthwhile in this week's very special and very unusual Parsha Podcast to perhaps revisit this verse and study it a bit deeper to hopefully increase our love of our fellow Jew, hard as that may be. You know, if someone is lovable, they're just so sweet and delightful. They're a cuzzy fuzzball. Someone like that, there really isn't a need to have a mitzvah, a commandment that we should love them. They're so easily lovable. The verse is instructing us to love those who are hard to love, those who I would otherwise really struggle to love. And I think it's also a mitzvah that's particularly important for us to embrace in times of national struggle. When we're going through a difficult period, traditionally we understand that as a sign of exile. We're not in the place that we ought to be. We're not in the manner. We're not living in the kind of way that we're supposed to be living. We're in exile. And the Talmud tells us that the reason why we went into exile is because of international discord and disunity. Because there was senseless, baseless hatred from one Jew to another. That's what led us into exile. And thus the way for us to get out of exile, to get into a better place, to have the redemption, to have the ingathering of the exiles, to have the restoration of the Davidic monarchy, to have what we call Mashiach. The way to do that is to reverse the cause of the exile. And that is accomplished by increasing our love for our fellow Jew. And certainly today, we're in the middle of the Omer cycle. And our sages tell us that there was a time of collective national tragedy during these days, during the time period of the Omer, the time period between Pesach and Shavuos, this is a time where 24,000 of the students of Rabbi Akiva passed away. And the reason why they died is because they failed to accord to each other sufficient respect. There wasn't enough love between them. And therefore, traditionally, this was always the time to try to give our brothers and sisters respect and love, even if we don't really get along, even if we're not inclined to love them, and even if we cannot stand them, and even if we disagree with them in the absolute strongest of terms, we try to find some way to increase our love for them. Now, that does not mean that we have to agree with them or even bend an inch on our principles. Our ideology is sacrosanct, but it's important for us to remember that they also are our brothers, and wrong as they may be, we should try to find a way to carve out some love for them as well. So let's examine this verse again, and let's share some interesting and novel nuggets of insights. This is not going to be one idea, but a collection of ideas, a panoply of ideas, a medley, a cornucopia of ideas to help us appreciate this wonderful verse, this wonderful mitzvah, and hopefully take a step to improve and to deepen our fulfillment of this mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself. So the first idea is one that we've shared before. I wrote about it in my book. I think it's important to hear it again if you've heard it already once. The verse starts off with lo sikom, don't take revenge, and do not bear a grudge against your countrymen. And then the verse's famous words, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself. And the Talmud tells us that there is an internal theme of this verse. The verse is talking about not to take revenge, not to bear a grudge. And Rashi, of course, explains what the difference between taking revenge and bearing a grudge is. But it means when someone does something wrong to you, don't do something back to them. And then it says you should love your fellow as yourself. And the Talmud gives us a dramatic teaching that connects these two ideas into one theme. It tells us there was a butcher, and the butcher was hacking away at a slab of meat. And by mistake, he cut himself. And now there's a bloody gash on his left arm that was inflicted to him by the knife held in his right arm. So what does a person do? What does a rational person do? Someone did something bad to you. Someone made you bloody. What do? You go get revenge. So the left hand grabs the knife, wrestles the knife away, and starts hacking away at the right hand to get revenge. Of course, that's crazy, because the butcher is causing himself more pain. Says the Talmud, this is revenge. We view the Jewish nation as a single entity, a single soul, and even really a single body. At sign of the Jewish people, we're one person, like one man with one heart. That's really the way we are. And we're deluded into thinking, erroneously, that we're all separate, discrete entities. That's a mistake. The truth is, we're in fact just one person. And if someone causes you pain, it doesn't make sense to hurt them back because you're just hurting yourself. It's self-flagellation. Don't take revenge because you're one person. Well, if you're one person, you should love your fellow as yourself because that person is, in fact, yourself. This is a very powerful idea. Our reality is a bit distorted. We view ourselves as individuals who are completely unique. And that's, of course, the de facto state, right? If I eat a candy, I feel pleasure. If you eat a candy, I don't feel no pleasure. I have to tell a story. On Pesach, we had a guest. A family came for one of the meals, and we have the special Pesach Coke with the yellow cap. There's once a year they make a run of kosher for Passover Coca-Cola with the yellow cap, because it doesn't have any of the ingredients that would maybe make it a problem to consume on Pesach. So they have a kosher for Passover run with the yellow caps. I'm sure you've seen it. People like it because it doesn't have the corn syrup. It's like Mexican Coke. Tastes better. Allegedly. I just have the Diet Coke. Don't judge me. I prefer Coke Zero, of course, but they don't have a kosher for Passover Coke Zero. They have a Diet Coke. Okay, we'll manage with that. But anyhow, we put the sodas in the freezer before the meal. So it's nice and slushy. So we're eating the matzah. And then we pull out the Coke. And I was so excited about that. And there was a family that came to visit. And parents and a couple of children. And the kid is pouring Coke for his dad. And it's a little kid, right? We're not judging him. We're not judging him for his behavior, but there's something to learn about what happened. So he's pouring his dad some Coke, and he pours like just a little bit, an inch and a half. He's like, well, we have to save for someone else, right? So I tell him, I said, no. When you pour for dad, you fill up to the top. You don't worry about saving for someone else when it comes to pouring for your dad. But anyhow, I was following this kid the whole meal. Okay, he pours his own cup all the way to the top. And these are not small cups. These are big, nice Shabbos glasses, goblets, chalices. He pours it all the way to the top. And he gulps it down. And I'm not exaggerating, okay? It's maybe late at night, but this is the truth. He filled up 3 full cups of Coke. And downed it. I'm thinking like he's so worried about other people, allegedly, when he fills his dad's cup. But when it comes to his own cup, he fills it all to the top. And I'm not judging. He's a little kid. But this is emblematic of how we start off life, right? If I drink the Coke, it tastes great. I enjoy it. When you drink it, I don't enjoy it. Because we view ourselves as different. And that's what we're trying to mature out of. And when you get married, that is an exercise in updating your reality. Because you're taking another person saying, no, it's not just me who is me. It's you who's part of me. And I'm going to care about you as if you are just an extension of me. And then you have a child, and hopefully a few children, a family. That is a whole process of expansion of yourself. And that's why it's hard, and that's why it's rewarding. And the truth is, this is just an exercise. It's just a beginning. The ultimate goal is to realize that it is as asinine and illogical to take revenge against another one of your countrymen, because even that person is just an extension of you. It's like a right hand to a left hand. It's like that old line. On the federal level, I'm a libertarian. On the state level, well, I'm more conservative. On the local level, I'm liberal, and it's a communist home. The members of our household, we realize that they're just an extension of ourselves. And you know what? If everyone really, really, really believed to love your fellows yourself because they're just the right hand and the left hand, then you could have a communist system. But alas, we're not quite there yet. And that's why it doesn't work and never has. Maybe we'll in the future. Who knows? If everyone really viewed everyone else as being just an extension of them, maybe it could work. But that's the internal consistency of the verse. The Torah is expecting us. This is the mitzvah. That's why it's so hard. That's why it's a great principle of Torah, because you really have to do all of Torah to be able to live this way. To look at every one of our countrymen, every one of our fellows, and to view them not as a separate, standalone entity that's different from myself, but that's just the right hand to my left hand. That is a very powerful insight. And that maybe is a perspective that we can have, that, when your leg, you have a bum leg or a bum knee, or your elbow hurts, or you got bad shoulders, multi-directional subluxation in your shoulders, you don't disown it. You try to find a way to remedy it. If there are some people, some individuals, part of our nation that are corrupt and wrong and behaving improperly, we don't just amputate. We find a way to remediate. And that is a perspective that I think is very, very necessary when we look at our fellow Jew behaving in ways that are completely unconscionable for someone of our people to behave. There's another idea here. This is also an idea that we've shared in the past, but it's important to revisit as well. Revenge, our sages tell us, it's illogical and it also lacks faith. A person who has complete faith, that person realizes that nothing happens to them, nothing good or bad. Nothing happens against or outside the will of God. Even when some other person does something bad to you, the true believer knows that this cannot happen outside the will of God. And therefore, when some other person causes you pain or causes you some suffering, a true believer knows that, well, I must have deserved it on some level. Maybe my sins caused it, and really it's the Almighty who is decreeing this. And therefore it's not logical and it's not a manifestation of faith to try to take revenge because that person's not the real cause of my misfortune. Rather, it is the underlying reason, which is, or I need it for some reason. The Almighty determined that when I deemed it appropriate for me to have that, because otherwise I wouldn't have that. It's like they talk about the dog, right? The dog. You hate the dog, which I do not recommend. We don't condone violence of any kind, not against people, certainly not against animals. But if someone were to hit a dog, the dog wants revenge against the stick. The dog does not understand that the person is the one who's wielding the stick. We try to acquire the level of faith to realize that anything that happens to us, anything that transpires to us, is ultimately a manifestation of the will of God. Now again, this is a hard level to master because it completely contravenes our standard perception. When someone does something wrong to us, when someone pains us, when someone mistreats us in any way, we instinctively attribute our suffering to the aggressor. And this is a very hard framework to break out of. But an attitude of true faith understands that nothing, absolutely nothing negative will occur to a person unless it is thus decreed from heaven. They deserve it for whatever reason. And thus the aggressor is simply the implement of God. Now again, this is a very powerful perspective and one that's very hard to adopt. Yet our sages tell us that this is what the Torah is trying to convey to us. When it says, don't take revenge, it's obligatory. We cannot take revenge or bear a grudge. Now the punchline of the verse is, love your fellow as yourself. Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. What's the meaning of that final words, the final few words of this verse? So this perhaps can serve as a tactic. You want to love the unlovable, someone who makes it really hard to fulfill this mitzvah. How can I possibly love them? They're so unlovable. They behave so inappropriately. They're so corrupt. They're so undeserving of love. I am Hashem. The Almighty loves that person. And that should be good enough reason for us to love him as well. If you cannot perceive anything redeeming about a person, and you squint and you try so hard and you can't see nothing, you find nothing redeeming, you can know for sure that God loves them, and that should serve as evidence that they are worthy of love. And again, this is all hard to do. Everything we're talking about here is hard to do. And our sages tell us this is a major principle of Torah. And as we'll get to the story in a bit, Hillel tells the prospective convert, You want to know all of Torah while balancing on one leg? Well, all of Torah is to love your fellow as yourself. This is not easy. This is very hard. But at least conceptually, we have an idea. How do we love someone who's unlovable? I am Hashem, realize that Hashem loves them, and that should be enough. Even if we find nothing about them that is worthy of love. Now Rashi offers an iconic comment to this verse. He tells us this is a great principle of Torah. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. It's a great principle of Torah. Now what does this mean? So the commentaries, of course, offer a whole variety of explanations. One idea is, well, this is a cardinal rule of the Torah, that the way someone treats others, that is the way that God treats them. Love your fellow as yourself. This is a major principle of Torah. God will treat you the same way, in the same manner. And there's a bit of a nuanced reading here. Kamocha, as yourself. The way you treat others, that is the way that God treats you in every area. This is a great principle of Torah. So if a person is kind and loving and generous towards others, the principle states that the Almighty will also treat them in that same manner, in that same fashion. And this, I think, is another idea that we can take with us. It's a very good idea. It's a very beneficial idea. It's a very worthwhile idea to try to invest some time and effort in finding some way to love those people that maybe it's a bit harder to love, because that will unlock a corresponding divine treatment of us. We want love from God. Let's give love to others. And then I saw this other idea. Rashi in his comment tells us, this is a klal gadol. It's a great principle, Torah in Torah. So I saw one of the commentaries says a very nuanced reading of this Rashi citation. It's a major principle in Torah to love your fellow as yourself, even though in non-Torah matters, in mundane matters, it may not apply. And they cite the Talmud. Talmud tells this halachic debate that happened. If there are two people in the desert and their throats are parched and they're really thirsty and they're far away from civilization, but one guy has a jug of water. And if they share the water, neither of them will make it to the city. They'll both die. And if one of them drinks the water, it's his after all, he'll survive, the other will die. What ought they to do? You have water. If you drink your water, you'll make it to civilization, you'll survive. If you share it with your friend, you'll both die. What is the proper behavior? Talmud tells us that first, one of the sages argued, how can you not give water to your fellow who's dying of thirst? You have to share with them. How could you witness the death of your fellow and not give him to drink? Comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, no, you're wrong. The proper approach is that you drink the water and you survive. The verse says, V'chai achicha amach, your brother will live with you. Your life comes first. Your life supersedes. Your life takes precedence. So the commentaries tell us, if your life takes precedence over someone else's life, how can it be that you love your fellow as yourself? To explain that, Rashi says this is a great principle of Torah. When it comes to water, when it comes to physical water, in mundane matters, I don't need to love them as myself. My life takes precedence. I drink the water, even though that means that they'll die. I don't have to forfeit or lose out on my agenda for their benefit. But in matters of Torah, I do. Now, this is very controversial, but if we take our words seriously, suppose we actually believe that the Torah is 100% true, and we have a soul, and that soul will have to give a reckoning and an accounting for our behavior after we die, and it's all serious, and every mitzvah really matters, and every drop of Torah is priceless. And our objective here in life is to overcome our challenges and to really deepen our connection with the Almighty and to really engage and invest in our spiritual halves, because that's what's going to matter after we die. Someone who has that perspective, every moment is absolutely precious. Because in one moment, you could study Torah, you could do mitzvahs, and you could earn eternity in the afterlife. But what about helping others in matters of the spirit? Suppose you're in a spiritual desert, and you have some spiritual water, and your friend has none. What do you do then? Do you just drink the water yourself and let them die spiritually? Or you share with them and you forfeit some of your own spiritual vitality for them. Says Rashi, this is a major principle in Torah. In matters of Torah, in matters of spirituality, you have to forfeit some of your advancement for them. My grandfather, blessed memory, would tell his students that they have to dedicate 10% of their time that they would otherwise dedicate to their own studies. Dedicate 10% of your time, like tithe. You tithe your money, tithe your time, for the benefit of the Jewish nation. So he would tell his students, one night a week, instead of going to study Talmud on the highest level, in the greatest depth, which is, of course, the highest and greatest use of your time, instead, he would tell his students, go to a secular kibbutz and go find some Jews who know nothing about Torah, about their glorious heritage, who are not connected to Hashem in an active way. Go study with them. Read some verses in scripture. Go help them engage in their spiritual growth. And by doing that, you're not studying Talmud. You're not studying Talmud on the highest level, on the most advanced level. You're forfeiting your own spiritual growth, your own eternal life, really. Because every moment's a whole lifetime, every day's a whole lifetime for them. What is the justification for that? How can you forego your own advancement for another's? This is a great principle in Torah. In other matters, if it's physical water, no, you don't have to share. If you've only enough for yourself, what can you do? You feel bad, but the other person will die. You'll survive. But in matters of Torah, you need to forfeit the water judge, so to speak, and give some waters of Torah to your fellow Jew. Again, another powerful idea. We have so many of our brothers and sisters that aren't listening to this podcast, who aren't trying to engage with the Torah, trying to engage with the weekly parsha, trying to engage with what it means to be a Jew and how we can do our best effort in trying to connect to the Almighty via His Torah. It's our responsibility to try to reach out to them and try to bring them in, to try to engage them, that they should also connect with Torah, with their Judaism. And even if that means that we have to forfeit some of our own spiritual growth, this is a great principle in Torah. I want to end off with one amazing idea. This is a very famous story. Everyone knows this story. It's one of the most memorable stories in the Talmud. It tells, this is in Shabbos, page 31a. It tells of the Gentile who wants to convert. And he goes to the great Rabbi Shammai and tells him, convert me, but I have some conditions. This is not a generic conversion. I want to study all of Torah while balancing on one leg. It's a very unusual request. And the great rabbi doesn't have patience for every meshugana, so he takes a builder's cubit. Shammai was an appraiser. The word Shammai actually means appraiser. And he had an amma, a yardstick. It's like a cubit yardstick, like a ruler that's a foot long, right? He had an amma yardstick, and he used it to shove him into the wall. Undeterred, this conversion candidate went to Hillel. And he makes the same request: convert me on condition that you teach me all of Torah while balancing on one leg. And he says, sure. Go ahead, balance on one leg. That's all I need, 10 seconds. That you hate, don't do to your fellow. That's all of Torah. V'idach pirusha. And the rest, that's just commentary. Zil Gemara, go study. This is the famous episode of this storied convert who wants to study all of Torah on one leg. Now, what do we make of this? Of course, if this is recorded in the Talmud, it's not just some funny story, but it seems kind of nonsensical. You can't even study the periodic table or the times chart while balancing on one leg. You can't learn all of Aleph Beis, the alphabet, in such a short span of time. How did this Gentile ever expect to study all of Torah on one leg? And the commentaries tell us that what he was asking was a very sophisticated question. We know that to live a good life, you have to do the mitzvahs. How many mitzvahs do you have to do? You have to do all of them. Our sages tell us that the amount of mitzvahs, 613, equals the amount of parts of the human body and the human soul. And what will a person look like in the afterlife? What will determine their vitality in the afterlife? Each one of these 613 mitzvahs is creating a replica human, a spiritual human. You do a mitzvah, you're creating that part of that future human in the afterlife. So if someone does all 613 perfectly, they are a perfect entity of 613 parts for the afterlife. But what if someone is not, in the past, there was something called a man and a woman. That crazy thing, the people used to believe that a long time ago. Crazy. Our ears just, it's so painful to hear that. People used to have that belief. People have that belief. And therefore, there are some mitzvahs that only a man can do. And some mitzvahs that only a woman could do. And some mitzvahs that only a Kohen could do. And if someone is a Kohen, well, they can't bury the dead, for example. So not everyone could do all 630 mitzvahs. So how does a person ever accomplish all 613? How do I fulfill all of Torah on one leg? The word for leg is regel, but the word regel also means an instance. When Bilam was having his conversation with his donkey, you recall that story. The word regalim, the donkey told him, why do you hit me these 3 regalim, these 3 times, 3 instances? The word regel means an instance. So this very clever convert or prospective convert, he wants to know, how can I do all of Torah in one instance without having to come back for another round? I want to do all of Torah, and I don't want to have to do this twice. So what does Hillel do to him? He shoves him. He takes this builder's cubit and he shoves him in the wall. And what happened? Did the wall shatter? Did it break? Did it fall like a house of cards? No, it remained strong. Shammai was telling him in a cryptic way, of course. When you have a wall, the stones, not just a bunch of stones, the stones are connected and they're cemented together. And because they're all united, it's not just a bunch of bricks, it's a wall. That endures much stronger than just a bunch of random bricks. The Jewish people, if someone converts, well, they're joining this one nation. They're not just this floating brick. They're part of this wall. And even though not any individual can do all such 13, but collectively the whole wall together can. And that's how, with this process of unification into one entity, that is how we each fulfill all such 13 because we're united together. So yes, the right hand doesn't necessarily do this mitzvah, but the left hand does. What if someone only wears tefillin on one hand? Well, how does the right hand benefit from the tefillin that was placed in the left hand? Or how does the leg benefit from the tefillin? Well, it's one entity. If Jewish people are one entity, like one wall, so yes, the part of you that is you and not someone else cannot do this mitzvah, but because that other part of you that is you, this is confusing. What I'm trying to say is that if you're just one entity, like one body, so yes, you, the individual, is hard to say. You know what I'm trying to say, right? The discrete you didn't do it, but the expanded you did. And that was his response. And of course, this convert, he was shoved into the wall. He didn't understand what Shammai was telling him, so he went to Hillel. And Hillel gives him the same answer. How am I going to fulfill all of Torah in one leg in one instance? When you love your fellow, you become interlinked with them like bricks married to each other in a wall. And when they do a mitzvah, that mitzvah spills over to any other part of that person. Again, the continuation of the theme, don't take revenge because you're two parts of one whole. Love your fellow as yourself because you're two parts of one whole. Love your fellow as yourself, you're two parts of one whole. If your right hand does a mitzvah, the left hand benefits from it as well. So this would be another idea. Another idea why we should try to invest some time and effort in trying to love our fellow as ourselves. We gain some tremendous benefits from that. Those mitzvos that we cannot do, or we don't do properly, or maybe we don't do at all. If we simply love them, we're binding ourselves together as if we're one person, and thus we benefit from their mitzvos because now we're just two parts of one whole. So I think these are some good arguments for us to try to make an investment in trying to love our fellow as ourselves. Some practical things that we can do. The Rambam lists a whole long list of practices that we can do to exercise this mitzvah, loving your fellow as yourself. He tells us to visit the sick and to comfort the bereaved and to help bury the dead and to help marry off the bride and to lend money to others and to engage in all matters of the burial of the dead, because of course that's the greatest kindness, because you don't expect any payback from the dead. To use your shoulder to lift the burden of your fellow, to rejoice with the bride and the groom, to feed them with all their needs. This is a sampling of some of the mitzvahs that he says. They're all included under this general rubric of love your fellow as yourself. There are people that really are, make it really hard. Make it really hard. Not you. You guys are so sweet. You guys are wonderful. You guys are all lovable. I love every podcast listener. I met a few of them at some of the weddings. It was really nice to meet some listeners and to hear their stories and to just the notion of seeing people in the flesh and learning from people that they listen. It's really nice. It's really delightful. But all of you, every single podcast listener I've met has been delightful and easily lovable. But not everyone's like that. Not everyone's a listener yet. Not everyone's so easily and eminently likable or lovable. Let's do whatever we can to love them nonetheless. It's a fulfillment of this mitzvah that is the embodiment of what the Almighty wants of us. It's a major principle of Torah. You could distill all of Torah to this. Love your fellow as yourself. Yes, some people make it hard. Let's try to do it nonetheless. I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to me. If this was not just the audio is not as pristine as it usually is, or maybe I sound a little cranky and tired now. It's 1:10 a.m. now. It's kind of late here. I have a flight tomorrow morning. Actually, we have to leave tomorrow morning. The flight's at 2 p.m. Please God. And, but hopefully next week we'll be back at the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. Hopefully things will work out well for all of our trips. And I hope you are well wherever you are. We, of course, are hoping and praying that things go well for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. Just this evening, they began the invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza. So we're just thinking about all the soldiers that are going into face the enemies now, and who knows what's going to happen. We hope and pray that only good comes out of this operation, and hopefully they could get back the hostages, and everyone could be safe, and there could be security and peace. Please God, soon. They're in our prayers. It's important for us to pray every day for them, not to forget about what's happening, and do what we can to try to do our part, whatever that may be. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful, splendid rest of your day. A terrific and joyous Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the unending help of the Almighty, we will talk again next week. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.